What will happen when an alpha wolf finds out that his mate is a human, a situation never heard of before? How will he deal with the potential challenges from his pack and other packs around the world? And most importantly, how will he reveal the truth to his human mate? Unlock the secrets of the Black Forest with a click of subscribe. Chapter 4 Marcus POV. Pacing back and forth in my room, my mind going 100 miles an hour, and I couldn't shake the nervousness out of my system. I rubbed my now clammy hands on my jeans as I listened to the sounds that came from downstairs. The constant chatter of my pack got me on edge. Their eager voices reached my sensitive ears, and it was not helping my situation whatsoever. I have been waiting for this night my entire life, and now it has finally arrived. My 18th birthday. Anyone would think that the only reason why it is so special is because it symbolizes one's growth into adulthood, and they are not wrong. But for us werewolves, it is quite different, especially if you are a descendant of one of the most powerful alphas in the entire country. My pack is the Black Forest pack, hence the reason why we live in Black Forest, Colorado. We are the largest pack in the United States, as well as the most powerful one. We have over 400 pack members, and the number increases with every year after a couple mates and bears a child. It is quite extraordinary being raised in a pack as large as mine, but it has its faults as well. It's difficult to keep track of everything, and I am amazed that my father handles it so well. He is currently the alpha of my pack, and in 3 years, he will be handing the title to me, and just the mere thought makes me anxious again. Great! Tonight was the night where I will finally meet my mate. I know what you are all thinking, shouldn't I have found her the second I laid eyes on her? Well, that is the case for ordinary werewolves. When they meet their mates, the sparks fly instantly and they immediately recognize each other, but I'm different. Being of the alpha bloodline forces me to wait until I am 18 in order to find my mate. My father actually told me that before we come of age, and where our true alpha powers ignite within us, making us the most powerful wolf in the pack, we can actually sense our mate. Not to the extent where we automatically know they were created to be ours, but we just have that small feeling. He once told me at a very young age that when he set eyes on my mother for the first time, he had felt something. It wasn't the immediate sparks everyone talks about, but it was still something. On the night where he turned 18, he immediately caught her scent in the crowd, and the rest is pretty much history. It's really annoying if you ask me, having to wait until that age just to find the person I am destined to spend the rest of my life with. But I know it will be worth it. I couldn't help but wonder how my mate will be like. Will she be a part of this pack, or will I have to travel to another just to find her? What if she was a rogue? I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. Rogues were soulless, and having a rogue as a mate will be quite difficult. I know I wouldn't give up on her, but it might arise some questions as to how great of a leader I will be, but I didn't care. Whomever was destined to be my mate will be the person I will give my entire love to. At that thought, a face appeared in my mind. Ever since I had laid eyes on her, her face had never once left my mind. She even appeared in several of my dreams this week. My dad had mentioned about a pair of humans moving into our territory, and I was sent out to keep a watchful eye on them. When I once spotted them, I knew instantly that they will not be a threat to our pack. I was about to head back to the pack house until I spotted her. Her face made me stop dead on my tracks, and I couldn't help but emerge from the trees as she looked out the window. She spotted me instantly, and I knew she wasn't believing what she was seeing. Of course she wouldn't. Anybody who ever saw us in the woods by accident would think we were mutated wolves or something. We are quite large in size, especially me because of my bloodline. The very next day, her first day at school, I had immediately caught her scent and verified that she was indeed a human. As my best friends, Ethan and Alex, walked beside me, caught up on whatever conversation they were talking about, I couldn't take my eyes off her. My wolf kept on pushing me towards her, but he never dared to tell me why. She was heading my way and I took this very chance to just be close to her. She had been walking on my right side, so I moved in front of her path. She probably thought it was a mere accident, but it wasn't on my part. I didn't know what made me do it, but I felt at peace once I held her in my arms. It was quite amusing to see her blush at my touch, and I couldn't help but smile at the gesture. Ethan and Alex had asked me after our little encounter what was going on, but I just insisted that my dad told me to keep an eye on her since she was new to the territory. Ethan knew something was up, but didn't dare question it. Alex, as always, just went with it and began talking about another subject. Once I had reached homeroom, ignoring the constant chatter of my pack mates around me, I instantly smelled her scent approaching us. I couldn't be more happier when I saw that she had the same homeroom as I did. I was rather disappointed that that was the only class we had in common, but at least it was better than nothing. I did plan on getting to know her better. When the professor had walked in, he had done the usual greeting to everyone and the usual respectful one to me. Unfortunately for me, she instantly noticed and I dared not look in her direction. I had instantly scowled at the professor, but forgave him easily seeing as he had forgotten about the new human student. He won't be making that mistake again. She actually isn't the only human being in our pack. There are 2 other human families living here, and they both know our secret. We had trusted them enough to tell them, and they vowed to my father that they shall never speak a word about us. They still have kept their word to this day. In our school, there are 3 humans, excluding the new one, who has captured my interest since the very beginning. One of them is graduating this year with me while the other 2 are sophomores. Anyway, all this week I had been observing her, and there really isn't much to say about her. She is quite the puzzle and my wolf keeps urging for us to get to know her better, but he knows I can't. It will ruin my reputation. I know it sounds cruel for me to say, but if I were to get acquainted with her, I would never hear the end of it from the rest of the pack members. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps coming up the staircase and towards my room. The footsteps stopped before the door, and a knock was heard. I could easily smell the scent of Ethan, and I approached the door with a nervous hand. As I opened it, I was greeted by a smiling Ethan. I didn't bother to smile in return, I had other things on my mind. Especially her. "You ready for this, dude?" he asked cheerfully. I frowned at his mood. If only he knew how stressful this event was for me. I didn't answer and simply shrugged, looking past him. He immediately understood and nodded. That's the good thing about Ethan. He knows exactly what's wrong with someone, and will try the best he can to help. There's no point in lying to him, because he would immediately catch it, unlike his annoying sister of his. I still wonder if she was dropped in the head when she was a baby, because she was definitely a handful. The only reason why you'll know that they are related is by their appearance. They both have the same dark hair and light brown eyes. The only difference is that Ethan is someone I can actually cope with. He reached out and patted my shoulder, his way of comforting someone. "Don't worry, man. Tonight's your night. You just let it flow and everything will fall into place." I rolled my eyes. "Easy for you to say. You're not going to be forced to find your mate by your wolf, and you will not be taking a high position in the next few years." He chuckled at my childish behavior. "Aren't you forgetting that I'm being announced beta when you become alpha?" I had to admit, he had a point. Lucky for him, Ethan had already found his mate within the pack when he had turned 16. He didn't know of the pressures of waiting to find your mate, especially when you were a person like me. But like he just said, he is going to be my beta once I take the alpha position. It was really hard to choose which person will become the second most powerful wolf in the pack, seeing as I have 2 best friends. But Alex was quick to step back and hand the position over to Ethan. He was a very intelligent guy, but he never took anything seriously. Once, We were playing out in the woods in our wolf forms for the first time, and he had accidentally fallen over a steep hill and cut his hind leg wide open. The bone could be seen and everything. Instead of crying out in pain, he simply just laughed. I swear he had problems, but you couldn't help but love the guy. Let's go, your mom would make a scene if you don't get downstairs this instant. And besides, it's almost time. He had a point. My mother was one of those people who went insane if you never got to a place on time, and I didn't want to be standing in the middle of the crowd with her screaming at me. I had no doubt in my mind that even though I came downstairs right now, she would scold about my appearance. I had settled for a light grey t-shirt, dark jeans and Converse. I was going to be shifting anyway, so what was the point in dressing up? We made our way downstairs, and I was instantly greeted by many welcoming smiles and respectful bows. I may not be the alpha yet, but I was still next in line for the position. I looked around the crowd, trying hard to find if she had even made it to the party. My father had informed me that he had invited them since they were part of our territory now. It was really a disappointment to see that she was nowhere to be seen, and I hadn't smelled her scent since the first guest arrived. In a way, I was happy she wasn't here. How do you think a human would react if they were to see me run to the woods at the stroke of midnight, and emerge as a big black wolf? Yeah, I don't think I'd be hearing from her or her father any time soon if they had decided to come tonight. As we crossed the large clock that my mother seemed to adore more than me, I noticed that I still had 15 minutes before midnight. We walked outside where the rest of the pack was, and I was instantly bombarded with 1,000 questions from the one person who was worrying about this night more than me. My one and only mother. Where were you? The guests began to arrive almost an hour ago. It is not alpha-like to arrive so late. Is that what you're wearing? Couldn't you have at least dressed up for this special night? How do you think your mate will react when she sees you in this attire? I rolled my eyes at her. She really was quite a handful. My mother was literally a foot shorter than I was, and I had to look down at her. She had light brown hair and hazel brown eyes that were now glaring up at me. I may tower over her easily, but she always made me feel like I was just a few inches tall whenever she looked at me like that. Hello to you too, Mother, I said sarcastically as I gave her a kiss on her delicate cheek. As I pulled away, a man that looked like the older version of myself appeared beside her. He wrapped an arm around her waist securely before planting a kiss on her head. Relax, Lucia. You're making the boy more nervous than he already is. My father gave me an apologetic look, but I simply shrugged. What else would I expect from her? Are you ready? I nodded and gave them the best smile I could fabricate. I didn't know if it was convincing, but I didn't want to seem like a coward in front of my pack. I was meant to lead them one day, and showing any signs of weakness would be futile. With a nod of his head, he led my mother away, who was still shooting daggers in my direction. Great. I will not hear the end of it once I made it back home later on tomorrow. Well, that's if my mate wasn't so far away. She's not. Oh, so now is when my wolf decides to come out of nowhere and respond. He had been quiet all week without uttering a single word to me. I could always feel his agitation as he awaited for this day to finally arrive, and now that it already has, he was more unsettling than ever. Calm down, you're making me more nervous than I already am, I scolded at him. I could feel him smirk at me before he went back to his wordless self. Man, my wolf could be stubborn sometimes. With that, I felt him growl inside me, and all I could do was smile. He really did act like a child when he wanted to. Snapping out of my thoughts, I felt two slender arms slither their way around my neck, and I couldn't help but wince at the contact. Where the hell did she come from? Claudia, who was wearing a tight red dress that clung to her body and was nearly exposing her long legs a little too much for my liking, was now pressed against me and giving me a wet kiss on the cheek. I tried my best to not look disgusted at the gesture, but even Ethan could see how much I was struggling in her tight grasp. All he did was laugh silently beside me. What a friend he was. Marcus, I have been looking all over for you. I smiled weakly. Man, her voice was annoying. How in the world did Ethan put up with her all these years? This girl had to be one of the most irritable females in the entire pack. I mean, I did have practically all the UN-mated females drooling at my feet without even trying, but she was the most persistent one of them all. I had even heard from some of the few pack members that she had personally went up to every girl that would say hi to me and told them that I was hers. How in the world could I be hers if my wolf never even recognized her as a contender? And trust me, I have actually given her a chance and tried to see if I felt any connection with her, but it was simply hollow. The only thing I felt towards her at this moment was annoyance and irritation. Can't this girl ever give up? As if on cue, I felt her loosen her grasp around my neck and move away from me. But to my surprise, she wasn't moving away by choice, she was being forced to. As I turned to look at her, I noticed that Alex had appeared out of the blue and pulled her away from me. He now had her pressed against him and secured her by wrapping his arms around her waist. She struggled against his grasp with an irritable expression. Alex, let go of me. I couldn't help but chuckle at her protest. Like he was ever going to do as she asked. Alex was quite the womanizer, and he always had his eyes set on Claudia. Why? I have no idea. I'm telling you, I have no idea what goes on in that boy's head. Anyway, ever since he noticed that Claudia was attracted to me our junior year, and I was clearly not interested, he always pulled her away at the perfect times. I owed this kid my life for saving it, who knows how many times, before because of this chick in front of me. Then again, Alex was the type that he would go for any girl in the pack. I wouldn't even be surprised if he had already slept with Claudia. As if hearing my thoughts, an evil smile played at his lips as he leaned his chin against her shoulder. She was still thrashing about, but he didn't even seem to notice. Ah, the perks of being a male wolf. But I wasn't surprised why many girls would play along with Alex's games. He was a handsome young man. He had light brown hair and blue eyes. His tan skin was fair and he tended to get all the girls he wanted. Even if they still wanted to be with me. What's wrong, sugar? I thought you wanted to be with me, he cooed against her ear. Her expression was priceless. You? I don't want to be with you. Now let me go, you pervert. Suddenly, a loud piercing noise erupted from the microphone. The sound was a lot louder to our sensitive ears, but we all still looked towards the end of the backyard where my dad now stood on the small platform that some of the pack members had assembled earlier in the day. He gave us all an apologetic look before his eyes landed on me. With a swift movement of his hand, he motioned for me to come forward. It was now or never. Now? I couldn't decide who was more persistent, Claudia, or my wolf who decided to be a jackass this past week when I needed him the most. The crowd parted, leaving a narrow path for me to take with Ethan right behind me. I stepped onto the platform and stood beside my father. My mother was on his other side, who had a bright smile on her face. Man, she's a moody woman. My father gave me a tight squeeze on my right shoulder before he turned to the crowd. Welcome all. Tonight is the night where my son finally turns 18. With that, the crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and whistles as the pack gave me bright smiles. I tried to smile in return, but I'm pretty sure it looked forced if anyone were to be standing right in front of me. Beside me stood Ethan, who gave me a reassuring smile the second he sensed my nervousness. He knew me better than anyone, which is why I had chosen him to be my beater. He leaned forward and whispered above the screaming crowd, "Just relax, man. Let your wolf take over when the time comes. He'll know what to do. He's right, you know." I swear, My wolf had the most random moments to come forth and speak, but Ethan was right. For us alphas, when it's already midnight, our wolves take over and follow the scent of our mates no matter where they may be around the globe. As the crowd settled down, my father cleared his throat beside me. There is only a few minutes left before midnight. May my son be safe on his travels, as he brings us home our next Luna. The crowd erupted into another round of applause in front of me. I couldn't help but notice the eagerness in their eyes as my father said those words. They all knew that I would become alpha one day, but they didn't know who would be their next Luna. Just like the alpha, the Luna had to be a strong wolf who can look after her pack and attend to them if they ever needed her. Our mate would do just that. How do you know? You haven't even met her yet. I may not have met her yet, but she must be our mate for some reason. Why would the goddess give us a weak mate if she couldn't attend a Luna's duties? He had a point there. The goddess did pair every wolf with a significant other that would make them a better wolf, inside and out. Being the alpha's mate meant that you would be bestowed many duties, and you have to be a strong wolf in order to fulfill that role. Suddenly, as if a mental clock in my head told me so, I slowly felt myself losing control of my human form, and my wolf stepped forward. I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths as a strong scent filled my nose. It smelled of cinnamon and a hint of mint. It had to be the most mouth-watering scent I have ever smelled in my entire life. I snapped my eyes open, having no doubt that my eyes were pitch black since my wolf had already taken over. I turned my head south and was not surprised to see that my parents and Ethan had stepped back to give me enough space for when I shifted. Without a second thought, I launched myself in the air as I shifted into my wolf. The only sound that was heard was the tearing of my clothing as I shifted. I didn't bother to look back to see the shreds. I instead allowed my wolf to take over as his paws collided with the earth below, barely making a sound. As the distance between the pack house and I increased, I could hear the faint groans of females as they realized that neither of them would be the next Luna. My wolf snickered at the thought, immediately telling me that he never thought of them as worthy enough to be our mate. Especially not Claudia. I couldn't have agreed more. I do admit that they were all beautiful in their own way, but never had I ever envisioned them standing beside me as I ruled the pack once I became alpha. My wolf gracefully dodged every tree as we made our way through the forest. The night was clear and there was barely a full moon in the sky. It provided us with the light we needed as we made it through the dark forest of our territory. It wasn't long until we sensed the end of it, and we were now in no man's land. This was where the rogues would run about. I would not be surprised if some would come out of hiding to attack us the second they noticed who we were. But then again, I think they would think twice before attacking. I was now 18 and a fully powered alpha wolf, meaning that any wolf that dared to challenge us would be greeting death in the face before any attack was launched to the other. My wolf and I could sense some rogues trying hard to catch up to us, but they were no match to the speed that we were running in. They eventually gave up and went back to who knows where. The second they disappeared, I sensed another set of wolves in front of us, but I instinctively knew that they were from our neighboring pack just south of us. The wolves were on high alert and knew that I might be passing through. It was by law that every alpha alert the other territories if their heir was to turn 18. Even if their mate was to be of the same pack, a warning had to be ushered around the globe just to be on the safe side. Before this law was established, there had been many alpha heirs that were killed due to the illegal passing to another pack's territory. War had emerged after these incidents, and once these wars ended, the law was quickly established to prevent any more unwanted deaths to occur. Thank the goddess for that. The wolves around us acknowledged us by bowing their heads slightly, immediately sensing the alpha authority within me. My wolf instead shook his head, indicating that his mate was not of this pack, and he was simply passing through. They immediately relaxed their bodies and went about their patrols for the night, probably informing their alpha, as well as their pack members, that I would be entering their lands. My wolf and I didn't even bother to go near their towns since there was enough land for us to pass through without being detected. I was sure that this pack would sense me, but they wouldn't do anything to stop me. They all knew that stopping an alpha wolf from finding his mate was just suicide, especially since it wasn't me who was in control at this very moment. My wolf chuckled slightly as he pushed forward, following the sweet scent of our mate. It seemed sort of familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As we exited out of the territory we were previously in, I felt my wolf quicken his speed as he dashed towards the next. He let out a loud howl that pierced the quiet night air, signaling that his mate was in this pack we were now entering. We immediately sensed the other wolves retreat and part an opening for us to enter. We eagerly dashed through the borderline of their territory and quickly made our way to our mate. This territory was not as large as our own, but we had heard stories of how gruesome their warriors can be if one was to ever battle them. I respectively nodded towards the wolves that were patrolling the borders in acknowledgement for their strength. They returned the gesture just because it was natural for an ordinary werewolf to bow down before an alpha, even if that alpha was not their own. Feeling like an eternity had passed by, we made our way through a deserted forest where her scent was the strongest. That was odd. Why wasn't she with the rest of her pack this late at night? Was she going out for a run? At the sound of my thoughts, my wolf plunged forward, eager to protect his mate if any rogue decided to trespass the territory and harm her. He let out a loud snarl, as his mind was filled with many possibilities of what may happen to her. I snapped back at him, his thoughts immediately dwindling. He might be my wolf, but I still had more power over him. Suddenly, he stopped on his tracks and sniffed the air. I could smell the hint of water somewhere near, no doubt a small lake of some sort. He trotted slowly forward, being silent as the still night, as he made his way through the trees. Her scent was intoxicating and my wolf was urging us forwards so he can mark what was rightfully ours. But a certain scent made us stop in our tracks. We sniffed the air, as we smelled the faint scent of a human mingled together with that of our mates. Was she with another human? My wolf let out a snarl at that thought and pushed us forward. It hadn't been minutes before we reached a small clearing. Craning his neck, my wolf peered over a set of bushes that blinded his line of sight. Before us stood an old-looking cabin, with a familiar truck parked on its side. In front of this cabin laid a small lake with a wooden dock leading towards it. The water was still as the night, and was illuminated by the moon that shone high above our heads. And that's when I saw her. She was sitting on the wooden railing of the porch with a book in her hand. She leaned her back against the column behind her, as her eyes seemed focused in whatever she was reading. She wore a long-sleeved shirt with a tank top underneath and shorts. My wolf and I couldn't help but stare at her bare legs. We wanted nothing more but to feel them beneath our fingertips as we caressed her. After staring at them for quite some time, our eyes lingered to her face. She was extremely beautiful with her long, dark brown hair surrounding her heart-shaped face, and her hazel green eyes that shined under the light of the porch. Her mouth moved silently, as if reading the words from the book out loud. Just the mere sight of it put us on edge, and we absent-mindedly took a step forward, the rustling of the bush's leaves breaking beneath our rather large paws. Our body tensed as her head snapped up, and she looked directly at us without even noticing it. We secretly hoped that she wouldn't dare to come near us, but we were proven wrong. Our little mate was stronger than she appeared to be. Stepping back slowly, we tried our best to distance ourselves away from her as much as we could without making a sound before we turned around and ran away from her. By this point, I was slowly taking control of our body, and my wolf was whimpering slightly as he felt the distance between us and our mate lengthen in size. I didn't like the sensation either, but he knew just as much as I did that she was merely a human, and exposing us that quickly would probably make us lose our mate forever, and that was something neither of us looked forward to. Without even noticing, I had made us stop on our tracks, completely ignoring her scent. By the time I sniffed the air to see where she was located, it was too late. Her hazel eyes met my own and I stood there, frozen. Just the mere sight of them made my heart skip a beat. My wolf howled inside of me to run to her and mark her as his own, but how do you think that would look? An abnormally large wolf running towards a helpless girl, just to bite her on the side of her neck. Well, that sounded pleasant. I took a small step forward, noticing how her body reacted to it as she took a hesitant step away from me. He growled in agitation. He wanted her to step towards him, not away, but I reminded him how we were in our wolf form, and she was probably frightened. With that thought, he immediately urged me to move forward and soothe our frightened mate, but I couldn't. Not in my wolf form nor in my human form. I think it'd be kind of creepy if a black wolf turned into a naked guy that she knew from school. That'd be an interesting story to tell. I tried my best to get as close to her as I could, but that only made her step away from me even more. At some point, I noticed her turn her body slightly as she prepared to make a run for it, and I couldn't help but let out a whimper in protest. She stopped midway and looked back at us, her eyes filled with pain. Was she actually deciding on coming to us? Could she feel it too? I was about to make my way towards her before she turned around abruptly and ran back to her cabin. I ran behind her, making sure to leave a small amount of distance between us so we wouldn't frighten our mate more than she already was. I could practically hear her racing heartbeat from where we stood behind the cabin as we came to an abrupt stop. My wolf whimpered as he realized that he could not comfort his mate when she needed him the most. I let out a low growl in frustration, making sure not to alarm her or wake up her sleeping father in the first floor. I paced back and forth, trying hard to figure out my next move. I knew finding my mate was going to be a difficult task, but I never knew it was going to be this difficult. In the history of werewolves, there has never been a wolf who had a human for a mate, let alone an alpha. It was just unheard of. I sat on my hind legs, looking up at the moon in question. Why did she pair me up with a human? Why me? Chapter 5 Marcus POV. I paced back and forth in the middle of the trees as the sky was illuminated with the sun's morning rays. It was a beautiful sight to see, but I paid it no mind. My mind was completely somewhere else, and it was all because of that human inside of that house. Don't talk about her that way. She's our mate. I stopped pacing and rolled my eyes. I was still in my wolf form, and my wolf was really starting to aggravate me. He had not stopped whimpering all night and crying out to his mate. Every little thing I would say about her would ultimately make him snap at me. The only thing he was forgetting was that she was my mate too. I let out a low growl in frustration as I laid down on the now damp ground that was filled with mildew. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I couldn't ignore the constant nagging in the back of my mind that began ever since this morning. I knew my pack was trying to get in contact with me, but I just couldn't respond. What would I tell them? That my mate was a human? That was unlikely. They were probably getting worried by now since I hadn't even once informed them of my location, but I knew they would sooner or later find out after the alpha of the pack that I was currently in, told my father. Suddenly, her scent hit me hard, instinctively making me stand up on all fours. My wolf had become more alert at her scent, and he was fighting his way towards the surface. It was really starting to get more difficult to calm him down. I trotted towards the nearest tree beside her cabin, making sure I was left unseen as I peered around it. I sniffed the air, my mouth watering as her scent seemed to be engulfed in the air around me. I searched the cabin's windows, trying hard to find any sort of movement inside until I saw her figure pass by the back window. My wolf inside of me jumped with glee, and I couldn't help but smile at his response. He could act like a child sometimes. I could hear her faint voice as she told her father, "I'm going to be outside working on homework, okay?" At those words, I immediately made my way around the area and towards the front of the house where the lake resided. I knew she wouldn't want to be anywhere near the back of the house after our little encounter last night. I sat on my hind legs as I waited patiently for my mate to step out of the house, unlike my wolf. He was pacing back and forth inside me, trying hard to resist from taking over my body and running toward her. There was no doubt in my mind that her father owned some sort of gun, and it was stored inside the cabin. I wasn't looking forward to having to remove any form of bullets from my flesh any time soon. I shivered at the thought. When I looked up, I noticed the front door open and out came the most beautiful girl I have ever laid my eyes on. She was wearing a loose white, long-sleeved shirt with a purple tank top under with a pair of shorts. She held a towel as well as a backpack in her hands as she made her way towards the small pebbles that surrounded the lake. When she finally reached her destination, she placed her backpack on the ground and laid the towel below her in one swift movement. I continued to watch her as she took out some books from her bag and laid them on the ground above the towel. She then settled herself on top, lying on her stomach. As she relaxed under the sun, I couldn't help but allow my eyes to linger over her body. She was wearing shorts that completely exposed her slightly pale legs, and that was driving my wolf into a frenzy. She had never worn these type of clothes before, so I assumed she only saved them for special occasions like this. If only she would wear this type of stuff more often. The other females in my pack wouldn't even compare to her. My wolf agreed with me on that. She swayed her legs back and forth in the air as she scribbled something down on her notebook furiously, her eyes concentrated on the page in front of her. I couldn't help but smile as I noticed her lips move once again as she mumbled the words she was writing down. I wonder if she even knew that she did that when she read something. I even wondered how it would feel like to kiss her lips. I shook my head, clearing my mind from the sudden lustful thoughts that began to occur, no doubt coming from my wolf. He really needed to calm down or else I would find myself naked above her and marking her. That's not a bad thought. I scowled at my wolf and laid down on the ground as I continued to stare at her. I don't know for how long I had been lying here, but I never seemed to get tired of watching this girl. Every time I would look at her, I would discover something new that I would automatically love, like the way she would scrunch her nose in confusion after she read something, the way she would twirl her hair in her hand when she was deep in thought, and how she would bite her bottom lip when she was furiously writing, her eyes completely focused at the task at hand. Little by little I was beginning to love this girl, and I knew absolutely nothing about her. Other than the fact that she was my mate and she so happened to be human. I still hadn't figured out why the goddess had paired us together, but I really can't complain. After what seemed like hours of observing her, I noticed her push her body upward into a sitting position and stretch her arms upward into the air. She let out a small moan and I couldn't help but inch closer towards her. As she stretched, her shirt had slid upwards, revealing her stomach. Her skin looked so soft and fragile, and I couldn't help but want to reach out and touch her. She packed her books inside her bag before standing up, swinging her backpack over her shoulder and grabbing the towel. She dusted it off before she made her way towards the cabin once more. My wolf whimpered in protest, hating the fact that his mate was leaving. But luck seemed to be on our side for the day. Instead of walking inside the house, she instead dropped her things on the porch and headed back out towards the lake. Her father just then opened the door with a fish pole in hand and a large bag in the other. "I am going fishing, Rocky. Care to join me?" he called out to her. She stopped on her tracks and a disgusted face appeared on her features. She turned around slowly, her lips turning into a forced smile as she stared back at her father. "No thanks, Dad. I'm just going out for a swim. I'd rather swim with the fish than eat them." Her father rolled his eyes playfully as he made his way to the truck. "Okay, fine. Just be careful, all right? You don't know what's lurking about in these woods." My wolf and I couldn't help but roll our eyes at his words. If he only knew. We won't let our mate get hurt while we are here. I nodded in agreement as I noticed her body stiffen. She simply nodded before looking around her, her hazel eyes desperately searching the trees. Was she looking for us? My wolf immediately became more alert and I couldn't help but feel him pace back and forth inside of me. I could have sworn I felt him wagging his tail. He's such a dog. He growled at that comment. I let out a wolf laugh before my eyes settled back on her. It seemed like it had been ages since the last time I saw her, and I didn't want to look away from her ever again. She stood there, searching her surroundings as her father left the area before I noticed her body relax. She headed towards the wooden deck that stretched over the lake. She stopped before I noticed her unbutton her shorts and pull them down. I immediately stood up and made my way through the trees so I could be closer to her. What the hell was she doing? She proceeded in taking off her shirt to reveal a purple bathing suit under, and man did she look good in it. This was the first time I ever saw her fully, and my wolf and I couldn't take our eyes off of our nearly naked mate. Our eyes lingered her every curve as she made her way towards the edge of the deck, leaving her clothes behind her. The way she swayed her body was making me go insane, and it was starting to get difficult to control my wolf. He was howling inside me, begging to be let loose so he can mark his beautiful mate, and trust me, I wanted more than just that. The mere sight of her body was driving me over the edge, and lustful thoughts evaded my mind. I tried to focus on something else, but my eyes wouldn't tear away from the beauty that was standing before me. Did she not know the effect she had on my wolf and I? She stopped walking, much to my disappointment, before she jumped into the lake. My wolf and I were suddenly brought to reality once we didn't see her emerge from the water. I immediately ran towards her, making sure I still kept myself hidden in the trees in case her father decided to come back after forgetting something in the house, but I stopped short after I saw her come back up for air. My wolf and I let out a heavy sigh of relief, as our fast-beating heart was calmed to its original rhythm. We gazed at her as she continued to swim happily around the water. I had to admit, seeing her get farther away from dock worried me, but she would immediately return to where she was a safe distance from it. She swam like this for a good hour before she made her way back to the rocks. As she emerged from the water, I had to fight the lustful growl that was beginning to form in the back of my throat. If I thought she looked good when she was dry, seeing her completely wet was another story. Her bathing suit now clung to her body as droplets of water rolled down her now somewhat tanned skin. She twisted her hair tightly, allowing the water to fall out of it. She made her way back onto the dock to grab her clothes before walking back to the cabin. I followed her behind the trees, not even paying attention to them as my main focus was on her. It was hard to take my eyes off her when she was like this. My wolf was fighting me now, and I was pretty sure my eyes were turning a darker shade and back to its original color rapidly. He kept snapping at me, urging me to shift back and run to my mate, but I easily ignored him. He knew just as much as I did that it would be dangerous for us to get close to her now. The best thing we could do was stay hidden, at a safe distance that we could cope with easily. She entered the cabin, shutting the door behind her and leaving my wolf and I feeling empty. She hasn't been gone for 10 seconds, and we were already missing her. Did she not miss us too? The mere thought of her not wanting us made my heart ache. Of course she wants us. She's our mate and we are hers. She may fight the urges that she cannot explain to herself, but sooner or later she will give in and she will be forever ours, and we will never let her go. I nodded in agreement, as I made my way around the cabin towards the back of the house, where I knew her room would be. Her scent was strongest in that area. My wolf and I pretty much spent the rest of the day watching her until the very next morning, when she was about to leave. I watched her as she packed her things in her room upstairs, until she left the cabin and placed her suitcase in the back of her father's truck. Minutes after she was settled, they took off, with us following close behind. Luckily for us, the road was surrounded by trees and they were a lot denser than the ones we had back in my pack, so there was no way she was able to spot us this time. It was more difficult running here than it was back home, but thanks to my wolf's agility, I had no problem in doing so. I kept a close eye on them, making sure there weren't any real dangers about to occur to either of them. To be honest, I really didn't care too much about him, but seeing as he was her father, I watched over him either way. Suddenly, I could sense the other wolves from this pack that were patrolling the borders coming my way. They were probably wondering why I had stayed in their territory for so long without marking any of their UN-mated females. As they got closer, my wolf began to resurface, and he let out a warning growl to each of them. They immediately stopped in their tracks and allowed for us to exit their territory without any conflict arising. Before I could get any farther, I sent a mind link to their alpha, informing him that I was leaving his territory and thanking him for allowing me to stay for the past few days. He responded immediately before he probably went off to tell the rest of his pack. Hours passed before we finally entered my territory. The second that we did, I could feel the annoying feeling in the back of my mind. By its intensity, I was pretty sure that practically the whole pack was trying to talk to me all at once. Without a second thought, my wolf let down our mind barrier and growled loudly. He knew that my parents were probably among them, but they didn't bother to speak any further. Their voices quieted down before we pulled the wall back up. I really didn't need anyone talking to me at the very moment. I followed them until they reached their home, giving my mate one last look before I made my way back. My wolf whimpered at the distance, despite the fact that we were only minutes away from her. "We will see her tomorrow, don't worry," I assured him, but even with that, he was still left unsettled. I slowed my pace as I neared the pack house. I shifted back to my human form, stretching out my muscles since they were sore from being in wolf form for so long. I walked towards the back entrance, seeing a pair of freshly washed clothes to my right. I quickly put them on and I could hear movement inside the house. They must have heard me and were coming to ask about my mate, but I was in no mood to talk to any of them. I just needed to be left alone for a while. Or with our mate who can calm us down. I gritted my teeth at his response as I forcefully opened the back door. Ignoring the stares I received, I made my way through the house, up the stairs, and to my room on the 3rd floor. The second I shut the door behind me, there was an uprise of murmurs throughout the house. I let out an irritated sigh as I threw myself on my bed. How are we going to tell them? I asked my wolf, who was still pacing restlessly inside of me. It's best we do it when we both have calmed down our nerves. The excitement of being with our mate is getting the best of us. He had a point there. The mere sight of my mate being a few feet away from me, and not being able to go near her was making me go insane. And her scent, oh her scent was the most mouth-watering thing I have ever smelled. Just the mere scent of her makes me want to run to her and hold her in my arms. My body immediately reacts to it, as well as someone in the downstairs area, if you know what I mean. My wolf chuckled at that. I didn't know for how long I had been lying there with my face buried in my pillows before I heard heavy footsteps coming my way. I let out a loud groan as I heard a light knock on my door. "It's me." "Let me in," Ethan said through our mind link. How he managed to go through our wall was beyond me. Reluctantly, I stood up slowly and made my way towards the door, unlocking the doorknob before walking back to my bed. Clearly hearing the sound, he let himself in. He didn't even bother to utter a word, as he sat on the chair near the small fireplace I had in my room. He moved it so he could be facing me, and I instantly felt his eyes bore onto my back. "All right, what's wrong? I know you better than your own parents, so don't even try to lie to me," he said, his voice slicing through the silence in the air. I let out a heavy sigh as I adjusted myself so I could be facing him on my bed. I didn't bother showing any emotion, it was probably already seen in my eyes. Did you find her? He asked quietly, an edge to his voice. I simply nodded. Where is she? At home. I wasn't surprised at how defeated my voice sounded. Why? His eyebrows pulled together in confusion. I knew he wanted to say more, but he didn't dare come up front. Good choice on his part. I shrugged, my eyes lingering around my room as I felt his eyes on me. He leaned forward, leaning his elbows against his knees as he intertwined his fingers together. Did she reject you? I shook my head as I stared outside the window. A moment of silence filled the air before he asked quietly, Is she dead? My wolf growled at his words and I instinctively snapped my head in his direction, my eyes glaring at him. Don't you dare say that. My voice was nothing but a growl. He flinched back, his arms coming up on either side of him in surrender. Sorry man, I was just wondering. You just came back without telling us anything. I was just worried something happened to her. He relaxed his posture as his face turned serious. Where is she, Marcus? I let out a sigh, running a hand through my hair. Could I really tell him? Well, he was my best friend after all and they would all eventually find out anyway. She's here. He raised an eyebrow. Here. Where's here? Here. Here as in the territory. Man, this guy was slow. He nodded in understanding before his eyebrows pulled together. But how can she be here if all of the pack members were here that night? I didn't answer. I simply looked at him as I waited for the points to connect in his head. Seconds passed before his eyes widened. He opened his mouth a few times to speak, but no words came out, until finally he said, You mean? The human girl. She's your mate. I nodded, relieved to find that I didn't need to say anything. If he had been anyone else, I would have probably choked them to death for having me say it. I mean, I wouldn't have minded telling anyone that I had a human mate, because I was already in love with her within hours of meeting her, but I knew how my pack would react to the news. And that is why I'm now here cooped up in my room with my best friend. Are you sure? He asked, his voice still in shock. I gave him a, Are you kidding me right now? Look. Of course I know she's the one. My wolf wasn't mistaken when he first laid eyes on her, and neither was I. He gave me an apologetic smile. He settled himself back in the seat, as he let out a soft sigh. So what are you going to do? Are you going to tell the rest of the pack? I leaned back against my pillows, covering my eyes with my forearm. I don't know, man. There has never been a case like this before. I mean, I looked back at him before continuing. Have you ever heard of a werewolf having a human as a mate? An alpha wolf to be exact. His eyes looked distant before he shook his head slowly. You see what I mean? We are the largest and most powerful pack in the country, and there is no doubt in my mind that they will have a problem with their Luna being a human. And not just our pack, many other packs around the world. The second this gets out, who knows how many packs will attempt to attack us. The room was then filled with silence. The only sound that entered our ears were from our very own breathing and the soft murmurs that were heard about in the house. Those who were here were being extra cautious since I knew they could sense the type of mood I was in. So, are you going to reject her? My body snapped back up and I glared at him, my upper lip pulling over my teeth in a snarl. I knew my eyes were pitch black as I felt my wolf tremble in outrage inside of me. There was no way in hell that we were rejecting our mate. She was simply perfect. She was exactly what we always wanted and we weren't giving her up that easily. Ethan didn't seem moved by my reaction, he only stared back at me, his expression calm. Then why are you worrying about what others will say? At that, my wolf and I immediately calmed down. To be honest, it was only me that wanted to keep her hidden, and not for the sake of hiding away from all the embarrassment I might have to endure, but because I wanted to protect her. My wolf was the one who wanted to scream out to the world that we had found our mate, and he wanted to show her off immediately. He hated the fact that I wanted to hide her from our pack. She was the rightful Luna, and if anyone had a problem with that, they would have to face us personally. So, when do you think I should tell them? At that moment, we could both hear my mother's voice desperately asking my father what was wrong with me and where was my mate. By the sound of her voice, she was clearly distressed, probably thinking the same thing that Ethan thought when he had entered my room. "I think that's your cue to go downstairs and tell them," he said, a small smile playing at his lips. With a loud groan, I reluctantly got off my bed and went to the door. As I descended down the stairs, I was happy to sense that he was right behind me. He wasn't going to let me go through this alone, which is why I always thought of him as a brother. The second I entered the kitchen, my mother spun around and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. I returned the gesture, only to find her glaring up at me. She placed both hands on her hips as she sent daggers in my direction. "Here we go. Where is she?" At the sound of her voice, I could hear the rest of the house quiet down as the other pack members listened in on our conversation. I sent a low growl around the house, knowing they would hear it and would leave the premises immediately. When I was sure that we were the only ones left, I turned back to my mother, who stood there waiting with a frown on her face. "She's here, Mom." Both my parents' eyes widened in shock as they began to sniff the air for any unfamiliar scent. I knew they probably smelled her on me, but it was faint since I never once got near her except for that first night. "Where? I don't smell her." I let out a heavy sigh as I shut my eyes. "She's not here, Mom. She's at her house." "Well, why isn't she here? She should at least meet her future in-laws." With those words, a smile crept along her full lips. I had no doubt she was already thinking of grandchildren running around our house. "Great. She's not here because she doesn't know we exist." I made my way over to the island and leaned against it, burying my face in my hands as I felt all eyes on me. "What do you mean? Isn't she Dash? It's Rochelle James." I shouted out, only to be greeted by complete and utter silence. I cautiously lifted up my head and peered through my fingertips to see their expressions. My mother's was one of shock while my father's was hard to describe. He didn't dare show a single emotion on his face, but his eyes said it all, no matter how hard he tried to hide it. Astonishment, disappointment, and happiness all swirled within the depths of his dark eyes, and I knew exactly why he felt that way. "Rochelle James. You mean the human who moved here last week?" My father asked slowly, his voice expressionless. I nodded my head, feeling a swirl of pride erupt inside of me at the sound of her name. My wolf immediately agreed, and he showed me a picture of her in my mind. I guess he hadn't stopped thinking about her since we left her at her house. "But she's human. How can you have a human mate, sweetheart?" My mother never even bothered to try to hide how stupefied she was. I shrugged. "I don't know. I really don't know." My father sat on a stool across from me, deep in thought. "But there has never been such a case. Humans have never been mated with a werewolf before. It's just not possible." He seemed to be talking to himself more than to everyone around him. Silence erupted all around us as we didn't dare look at each other, not even Ethan, who still remained in the room. We were all caught up in our own thoughts, and I was too busy listening to my wolf to pay attention to my parents in front of me. "Even if they don't accept her, we will never reject her." I shook my head, fully agreeing with him. "She's our mate and their future Luna. I am not letting her go. I love her too much already." "Then show them that." As my wolf became silent, I noticed my mother smile in front of me. She walked forward, placing a calming hand on my father's shoulder, immediately catching his attention. "Well, if she's our son's mate, When can we meet her? I raised an eyebrow at her. Was she serious? Oh, Mom, I can't really just bring her here without telling her what we are. We have to at least show her. Well, how are you going to do that? The sound of her voice let me know that there was no turning back now. She wanted to meet the woman who will bear her grandchildren, and there was nothing in this world that would stop her from getting what she wanted. She was quite a persistent woman if you asked me. I stayed silent for a few short moments before responding, I don't know. I'll have to see. Well, get to it. I want to meet my daughter-in-law soon. I'm not a patient woman, you know, she said, spinning around and exiting the kitchen. We know, we all muttered in unison. At the sound of our voices, she spun around and glared at us. We all gave her a mocking smile before we all burst out laughing. She let out a frustrated sigh before muttering to herself, "How do I put up with these boys?" When she was finally out of earshot, my father turned to me, all humor gone from his features. "You sure you can handle this?" I knew there was an underlying meaning to his words. I don't know, was I ready for what was to come for my mate and I? Yes, we are. With the reassurance of my wolf, I nodded confidently. She was my mate, and I wasn't giving up on her that easily. Human or not. Don't get left behind in the woods. Subscribe and hit the bell for more.